Let's make a journal and hear a story about the Countess of Clare. Hello and welcome to the treasured page. I'm Melanie and this is our quiet crafting space. Well, today I'm going to catch you up on a project that I alluded to a couple of videos ago. And this is a journal which I'm putting together using this kit, the White Roses. This is an unfinished journal that I'm piecing together and I have got this lovely linen cover so far. It's going to have embellishment on the front when I get to that bit, but what I'm doing is I am piecing together slowly, putting my 4 signatures in an arrangement. I'm working out how I want to have everything, and I am putting ephemera in ahead of time of sewing it in, because some of the ephemera may need to be sewn in using my sewing machine, and for that I'm just working it out before I start the binding. So I don't think I'll be binding it today, but I am just going to show you what I'm up to so that you can understand how I go about this project, and then we'll have a flip through some point later when I've finished it. But I have been quite committed to this one, as I said in a previous video. However, this has taken me on a little adventure in its own right, and I thought I'd better explain myself because I think you might enjoy the story that has come out of starting this journey. Today we're going to be looking at a journal that I started making on a previous video. That was using the White Roses kit from Black Creations. This is the add-on ephemera kit that you're seeing in front of you here. There's several pages. This is the background for White Roses, lots of papers for the White Roses backgrounds, so they come separately, and then more ephemera, and it's all just gorgeous, and it's just these lovely pure white roses that's printed onto 2 different types of paper. This is a photo quality paper and this is standard photocopy paper. It actually comes out slightly warmer on copy paper. It may be because it is more porous, perhaps. That's just a standard eco print. And then we have this also from Black Creations on her Etsy shop. This is Nostalgia Volume 2. There are several sheets of this with all the beautiful imagery here, artistic pictures I think, and then they can be made into tags, they can be journaling cards, they're ready to go. If you print one of the lovely backgrounds on there, which I haven't done on that one, I'm going to stick these down, but this one was off the other sheet, and I've put a background on there which I printed out from the White Roses. So everything has been really straightforward, and it's all come from Black Creations, and these could be used in multiple journals because they are very versatile, very, very lovely. And yeah, we're going to be using that on talking through what I've cut out. So now you might like to hear the story that has emerged as I've started to put together this journal, and I'm working with these beautiful white roses, and I will tell you where I left off with my previous video as I started to piece this together. And so I'm just going to be putting arrangements together on the pages, seeing what works, what I like, what feels right mainly, and then I shall just be sticking it down. But what I'm also going to be doing is I'm going to be adding this lace. Now I got some lace, quite a bit of it actually, I was really pleased, from the Isle of Wight. I went on an adventure to the Isle of Wight, took my cat, took my children, family, and we all had a little weekend away over the bank holiday weekend at the beginning of the month, and that was really great, and I managed to get a stack of this lace, and that's what I got. And I've also got this piece here as well, although I didn't get that from the Isle of Wight, that came locally. It was a really good find. So I'm going to add a piece of that wide lace into the journal. Maybe that will even come and be a pocket here. So that's probably where that's going to come and live. And then this is what I was able to find. So it's all from different eras. I'm using little bits and bobs. I wanted white. I didn't really find white. That was given to me by Glynis. That's not from the Isle of Wight at all. That's for the Nellie Bly journal. If you're not familiar with the Nellie Bly journal, total contrast to what's going on here. This was the Nellie Bly, and there's the white lace that I've used there from Glynis. So we've got lace going on in this one as well. So now you've seen it, I'm going to refer to an Italian part of my story, and actually it works for both journals. So when I say about the Nellie Bly journal, you'll now know I'm talking about this one. And this journal is all about a lady called Elizabeth. Although I say lady, she was indeed a lady, but she was also a countess. So this is about the Countess of Clare. She was born Elizabeth Julia Georgina Burrell. She was born in 1793. So this calming, peaceful, precision, beautiful, pure idea of this white rose up against this sort of grubby background is sort of quite perfect as this story has unfolded, and it is historically true. So I'm going to show you how it came about, how I understood it, and the serendipity of this journal. And I'm just going through and adding ephemera now, and if I want to sew anything or be able to get to the pages, which is easier than trying to do it when it's bound in a book, if I need to put anything through the sewing machine, I can do that now. So that's what I'm doing today. This is the little envelope that comes with the kit, really cute. And this beautiful paper comes from Brigitte's Designs over on her shop, her Etsy shop, which is linked below. That is the Beautiful Moments kit, or backgrounds. So there are some lovely images there, really sweet, and that would work for a lot of journals, those particular papers. So I've got some scraps here, just love that one, it's really nice. There's some red ones as well, really fun. So that's a lovely lining paper for any of the embellishments, so it's been really nice to put in there. A little bit of fun to open up, so it just breaks up some of the simplicity of this journal. Just have a little pop of colour but still keep it in the tones of the green that works with the flowers and the plants. So that's what's going on here. But what's happened with this journal is that I went away to the Isle of Wight to get some lace. I'd run out, I knew what I wanted, I didn't have it, and I wanted to be able to add lace embellishment here and there to some of the pages, break up some of the grunge that I've got going on some of the papers here. And when I got to Isle of Wight, which is the island off of the south coast of England. Now I live in the south coast, the Isle of Wight isn't very far for me to go to with a cat and a family. That was wonderful, had a really nice time. So when I got to the cottage, the first thing I saw out of the window in the little courtyard garden that they had there in this old fisherman's cottage was a beautiful white rose bush, just like this. And I thought, where have I seen that before? No, I've just been doing this journal, and it was the same day, and then I'm seeing the beautiful white roses in the garden. I thought, oh well, that's lovely, we're doing all about the white roses, and I'm here to look for some lace as one of my things to do. And then I found a lot of lace. I found all of this in a little shop, and this in particular is very old, comes off of a petticoat. So I thought, well, that's lovely, that's the white that I was looking for, but I also found some other as well. And then this, which has got the flower shapes on there, possibly roses. This kit also comes from Clee Black. That is her Silence kit, so there was a few pages in there that I just thought were perfect. I wanted to bring that in. So this is where I'm at so far. I've got some darker pages, and then I've got the lighter pages. The light and the dark, I think, is part of this journal's story. This journal has a story. All of my journals have a story. They come to me, I don't know how or why, but when I start making a journal, a story comes, and inevitably it is a true story, and it is from the past. And this journal is no exception. This journal is about another lady called Elizabeth. Now, the last journal I made was also about a lady called Elizabeth. This lady is the Countess of Clare. So there I am that day. I'd been working with the White Roses digital kit. I've been putting together some ephemera pieces and telling you all about how I was off to the Isle of Wight to go and get my lace. Then when I got there, I saw that there was some white roses in the garden of where we were staying. Not just any white roses, but a proper, prolific, climbing, wild rose bush that was up the trellis, over the fence, and was really, really amazing. And it was exactly like this image. So that was the first thing. Oh, white roses, how funny. I've just been journaling about that. The next thing we do the very next day is that we take the children to go and have a little wander around. So one of the fun things that we booked to do with the children was to take them to an escape room. So you go into an escape room, you get locked in there, and you have to play as a team and work out all the clues to be able to escape the room within an hour, I think we had, or an hour and a half. Anyway, we did it. Obviously, we're back and everything's fine. It was really fun. It was historic. And it was in an old church, and what they had told you is that you're going down into the crypt. You've got to work out all the different clues, and then you will be allowed out. So this is setting my historical mind working, and I'm loving the fact that I've got to figure out clues, and I'm being told all about history of the church and who might be in the crypt, which was a bit spooky, but I realised that it was probably a little bit of nonsense. And then they started telling me certain details and certain facts, and I thought, well, that actually sounds quite true. I wonder if that is. And so it got my analytical brain ticking into gear, and I started thinking, I wonder who did found this church and who put the cornerstone here, and is this actually true? And we were told that the Elizabeth Lind put the first stone onto this site when they were building this church. So this is the Holy Trinity Church in Ryde on the Isle of Wight. Elizabeth Lind put the first cornerstone when they were founding it, and her family were said to be founding members of the church, putting a lot of money into it, that she did a lot for the town. There's also a street named after the Lind, and so this had become a person that we were told was very special and had done a lot in the 1800s. So that intrigued me. I'm all about a good story about a pioneering lady who likes to get involved in the community. How wonderful. I'm just moving over to voiceover to allow me to create intuitively. So there were two churches on the Isle of Wight. One was Church of England and one is a Catholic church, and they were built at very similar time. Now, the crypt that I am being locked in down in this church was with my family. We had lots of clues. If anyone gets stuck down in the lost crypt in Ryde, then the first clue you're going to need to look for to get yourself out of there is roses. And when we were down there, we were looking at lots of documentations and things. This document comes from 1744, you can see there. It will have been written with a quill pen and ink. This is the sort of thing that we were looking at when we went down into the crypt. And we were discovering that Dr. James Lind was the naval sea surgeon that discovered the cure for scurvy, and that was by giving citrus fruit to the men on board the shipping vessels, and that prevented them from lots of maritime diseases. And even today we are served up with a glass of orange juice the world over for our breakfast, and that is all down to Dr. James Lind and his family. So they did found the church on the Isle of Wight, the Holy Trinity. But my focus then widened, and we had a look at a different church, and that is the Catholic Church, St Mary's, but not so much looking at the church, but more the woman behind it. Now, for the first church, Elizabeth Lind unfortunately passed away before she saw the church being built in its full entirety, and that was just the saddening times of the 1800s. But in the same time, and inspired by Elizabeth Lind, we also had Elizabeth Burrell, who was married at the time. She was the Earl's wife, and she was the Countess of Clare. So she was the Earl of Clare's wife. So this is the story of Elizabeth Julia Georgina Burrell. She was born in 1793. Her mother and father were Baron and Baroness, and they were of Welsh descent. So from her mother's side, Elizabeth, who the story is now going to be about, she was half Welsh in her heritage. She also has her husband, who is from Ireland. So we've got a very fiery makeup there with lots of cultures coming together. And this is the story of how she got married in 1826. She was a lot older when she got married. She was around 33. So in those times, she could have been considered as being left on the shelf. And also her husband was older as well when he got married. And they had a very rushed arranged marriage. It was all sort of quickly done by special agreement, and that is only something that used to happen if there was a pregnancy or some reason. Well, the reason was that there was a bit of a scandal surrounding her husband. He'd previously been to Harrow, the school, and he'd met Lord Byron, the famous poet, and they had struck up a special friendship. Now, Lord Byron is known prolifically as a romantic. That's his claim to fame with all of his poetries. He'd also written a love poem implying John Fitzgibbon as his muse and somebody that he had an affectionate relationship with when he was at school. Lord Byron was renowned for being promiscuous. He had a failed marriage and there was lots of inquiries about him. He was also being exiled out of the country, out of England, and he went to go and live in Italy and later in Greece. And then he tragically died. Now, letters then, private letters, were then discovered between the two men, and it was understood that there had been a friendship. Whether or not it was anything more than just that, or a work of art in its own right, it definitely caused tongues wagging. So John Fitzgibbon was very quickly married, and the two were joined together, and that seemed to help matters. It then gave Elizabeth a title of the Countess of Clare. So Elizabeth was a very wealthy woman because of her parentage. They were all noble people. They had a lot of money, and she was able to fund some of the debts that her husband was in. Now, their marriage was not to be. It failed, and they had a separation. And I think it's all surrounding when the letters of the scandal were coming out, and Byron had died before they'd got married, but it was following them around. It just wasn't to be, and the couple parted, and she came to live on the Isle of Wight to be near her brother and his wife, and they had children. So they were her nieces and nephews, and she then was there. She was over there, and at the same time, couple of years after she got married, her mother very sadly passed away, and I think she went over to the Isle of Wight, and it was a place to just be, somewhere where she could just be and grieve. She had her failed marriage, she had lost her mother, she was in a bit of a time of her life where she just needed to figure things out. Her husband was being stationed over in India as the Commissioner of Bombay, and she was not going with him. So any self-respecting noble lady would then have to have an excuse as to why she wasn't with her husband in India. So Elizabeth's husband, John Fitzgibbon, is the second Earl of Clare, and his father had been the Lord Chancellor of Ireland. He was the close friend of Lord Byron and was to have a successful diplomatic and military career in the Far East, and he then became the Governor of Bombay. So he's gone off to India, and the marriage to Elizabeth Burrell, however, was not successful, and in 1829 they came to this mutual agreement to separate. So she's on the Isle of Wight. She's had this mutual agreement to separate from her husband. There wasn't any animosity between the two of them, and she's moved in to the Isle of Wight, set up home at number 4 Brigstock Terrace in Ryde, and that was in order to be near her brother. Now, her brother was called Lindsay. He was a keen sailor who eventually founded the Royal Victoria Yacht Club, and he was also a generous benefactor of the Holy Trinity Church in Dover Street in Ryde. Now, this is the church that I was visiting with my children and playing a game in the basement of the crypt at this church. So it's now 1840 and the church has been built, the one where I was playing the game with my children, but there was no Catholic church. Now, at this time, looking for something to do is Elizabeth, as she's befriended her next door neighbour, Charlotte Elliott, and the two women travel together and she goes on a grand tour of Europe. Whilst on her travels, Elizabeth visits Rome in Italy, and it's here where she looks at the churches and the basilicas, and she visits St. Peter's, and she's helped to develop a profound interest in Catholicism. And among many of the priests that she meets there, whilst in Rome, one certain young Irish priest, Father Thomas Grant from the English College, was thought to be received into the Catholic Church in 1841, and their friendship that she established with Father Grant was to last the next 30 years. This realization, this doorway opening for her, was something that she could bring back to the Isle of Wight with a newfound sense of self. And when she arrives back home on the Isle of Wight with this newfound faith, she starts to go to Mass over in the Catholic Church in Newport, in the main part of the Isle of Wight, and that is a bit of a journey. While she's doing this, she notices that a man is walking all the way. He can't afford a carriage like she does, and she sees that he is walking every single Sunday and he gets to Mass, and he does it through complete devotion. She sees that that is too much for some people to have to walk, and feels that there should be a church more locally to people in Ryde. And this is where she gets the idea to start building a church. Now, this is a lady with a lot of money. She has a huge fortune to her name, and this is how she feels she can give back, and this is her project. She has a husband away. She needs to do something. She wants to give to the community, and from here we just see and hear lots of amazing stories over the Isle of Wight of what she was able to do and achieve. And she also built a nunnery, and she did so much for the church. Now, this is all very religious, and in a time when that was hugely important to many people of that time, to have church and to be able to go. Now, I'm not saying that it isn't today, but I'm just putting it in context that this was in the era of 1840. So that is what she was doing. And also what she was doing could be seen as controversial. Her husband's father, who died when her husband was quite young, was very anti-Catholic. He was Irishman, and he famously reported to be anti-Catholic. So what she was now doing, which was bringing a Catholic church to Ryde, it could be seen as a slight act of rebellion towards the Fitzgibbon family. So she starts writing a letter over to England in the mainland, asking the diocese there to send forth a priest that can come and live in Ryde and then be able to deliver Mass and the Catholic teachings for her to attend. Well, she gets very promptly told with a letter back saying that it would be impossible to send a priest over to Ryde to live. You have to have 12 Catholics in total. Well, she is a lady. She has people that work for her within her house. She has a housekeeper. She has cooks and gardeners. She decides to let everybody go from her house. She gives them all glowing references and she sends them packing. She then takes on a new collection of staff to come and work for her in her house, and every one of them has to be Catholic. When she gets a total of 12 people in Ryde, she sends her letter again and she says the situation, and she is asking for a priest to come and live in in Ryde. So this very forthright lady, it starts to appear with this new sense of self and has a mission, and she is very much able to take courage and power in that and use all of her education that she actually has and use it to the benefit, as she sees fit, of this cause to build this enormous, most grand church. And what she does is exactly that. So a priest is sent, he comes and lives in a villa, they have services, and she is able to go locally. Meanwhile, the Countess was determined to provide Ryde with a church and purchased a piece of land between the High Street and Warwick Street, and she set about with the designs. She engaged a young architect. Even though there were 2 Catholic churches already on the Isle of Wight, she wanted hers to stand out, to be very grand, and to be the place to come, new and modern of its time. She invited Joseph Hanson of Preston, a young budding architect, to come and realise her designs, and together they set about creating something very grand. The builder was Mr. Thomas Dashwood of Ryde, who used local ragstone and had also been engaged by her brother Lindsay to build the Holy Trinity Church on Dover Street. And the foundation stone of St. Mary's, which can be seen on the north wall of the sanctuary, was laid on the 17th of December 1844. Gone were the days when Catholic churches such as Newport and Cowes had to be designed like public meeting halls with no bells or steeples. Beneath the church was a crypt, and that contained a small chapel dedicated to St. Peter, which is now a small mini museum and a tea room. The west doorway is impressive and profusely ornamented with clustered shafts and rich mouldings and Latin inscription all over the place. The church also boasted a school room, which cost them £1,800 of that time. It was a huge sum. Once the church was complete, the Countess reconciled with her husband. All was forgiven, and she was able to have a friendship with him that she hadn't had before. She achieved this shortly before his death in 1851. For the next 10 years, Elizabeth sought comfort in her church and with her lifelong companion, Charlotte. Charlotte was the most generous lady, especially to the poor, and was frequently seen giving bread to those in need. Whilst making plans for the church, Elizabeth had planned to have a special burial vault put in the crypt underneath the church. This was intended for herself and for Charlotte to be buried in the future. However, Charlotte, being of a more humble demeanour, had promised Elizabeth that she would not be buried there. She wanted a very low-cost, simplistic burial, and for the money that she would have otherwise spent on a funeral to be given to the poor. And so the promise was made that she would not have a lavish funeral. The friends had agreed to this, and that had been the understanding. So when very suddenly, in November 1861, the Countess lost her dear friend and companion, Miss Charlotte Elliot. Whilst making an art project, Miss Charlotte collapsed due to a heart condition. It was very sudden and very unexpected. Elizabeth was distraught. She had lost her very dear friend. Elizabeth was determined to have her friend buried in a Catholic cemetery. Unfortunately, one didn't exist at the time in Ryde. It was an oversight that she was working towards, and this sudden event had caught her unawares. What happened next was the Countess had a special vault made in the cemetery, which was the Catholic quarter at Carisbrooke. The vault was dug and designed for 2. One side was for Charlotte Elliot, and there was provision made for the Countess herself. She even installed a glass panel, so in the future the 2 coffins would be separated by a window and they would be able to see one another and be together even in death. It was a dedication of devotion and love for her friend, and one that was carried out to the letter even when she passed away much later at the grand age of 86. The Countess followed every detail of Charlotte's funeral arrangements to the letter, including the use of simple white flowers and evergreens to decorate. After this, the generosity from the Countess knew no bounds. She would give money to the teachers, she would give money to the school. 2 years later, she built and endowed the Dominican convent at Carisbrooke. The site on the hill opposite the famous castle was chosen to be near as possible to the Catholic section of the cemetery where Miss Charlotte Elliot was buried, and it was here beside her beloved friend that she decided was her final resting place, where the nuns would pray daily for the purpose of her soul. She always had the desire to join the Dominican nuns, but instead she carried on her work to build further churches in Croydon and other areas in and around the Isle of Wight. This is a story of resilience, it's a story of unrequited love, it's a story of endurance and overcoming. It's a story of being able to stand up for what you believe is the right thing to do and for making supportive friendships along the way. And for those of you who have made it this far into the video, thank you very much for listening. There is a freebie available on my coffee shop which shows the images of Italy, and that was for the Nellie Bly journal inspired by. But when I started looking into this story, I realised that a turning point in the adventure of Elizabeth, Countess of Clare, was definitely also in Italy. And the white roses have come in through that story as well. And when I selected the white roses to work with, I did it merely because I was journaling in June. And the June flower in the UK is the rose. I chose the white roses for that reason alone, not for the story that has then found its way to this journal, but it is one of a woman overcoming and living within the restraints of society at the time, and how she would have been perceived by others and ridiculed, and yet she did it anyway. It's a very intriguing story about a woman who overcomes so much in that setting, that time frame. 200 years ago, when society put restraints on women and on how you had to behave if you were a certain class, if you had money, there was an expectation that you needed to go and be something or do something for the community. Well, she lived up to that. She did it extremely well, but she also lived the life that she wanted as much as she could. She had a friendship that she needed. She reconciled with her husband, she forgave, and she got on. And I just think that there's a strength there, even if the religious aspect of the historical facts don't sit right with you, that's fine. This is a story about endurance and resilience against whatever life was throwing at you at the time, and the influences that you were receiving, and how you work within your community and within the faith that you may have, and how you interact with your family, and how you can forgive and move on. And that is the message here, I think, for this journal. So if that speaks to anybody, if this feels like that is a connection for you, then this journal will be going on sale when I complete it, and I will be doing a final flip through and announcing when that will go on sale on the coffee shop. You can go and have a look at that and log on so that you are there if you would like to. You can also send me a private message if this absolutely speaks to you and it is something that you really would like to have as a healing journal for you. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening to the stories here today. If you thought that that was worth your time, do please leave a comment and leave me a thumbs up, and you will see me again on my next video. So until then, above everything else, just slow down and make crafting time for you. Bye bye now.